the failures of the Suns team do not fall solely on Frank Vogel, but I do agree that in terms of the limitations you have in terms of drastically tweaking your roster, unless you are willing to trade a member of the big three, like the only thing that you can do is kind of keep the core intact and change coaches, because a lot of people are not going to accept just running it back, top to bottom with the same coaching staff, the same players, and just counting on continuity. That's not good enough. So there's always going to be a fall guy in a situation like that. It does feel like Frank Vogel would make the most sense. But I do think it's important to note that changing the coach, as we learned last year, does not guarantee you anything. Even if you bring in a guy with championship experience like Vogel had, and you bring in another one like a Budenholzer or one of the few names that's on the market, like at the end of the day, you can bring in any coach in the league. The leadership in the locker room has to be better. The continuity, chemistry, fight in these guys, it has to be better. The question is whether another coach can hold them accountable and bring that out in them. And so I think I understand where people are coming from in wanting Frank to get the axe in that way, because if he did lose the locker room, or if the big three didn't believe in him, or if there's this perception that he's a nice guy, but he's maybe not the guy to get us across the finish line, then yeah, you can't really reestablish that kind of credibility over a summer.
But the whole idea that they can the coaching staff, to me, seems pretty asinine, and leave Frank, right? I don't know what you're actually accomplishing there, because if there was a rift, which I highly doubt there was, but if there was, you imagine it would have been Frank and Kevin, guys between those two guys. So clearing house, you're really not going to have continuity at that point, which they stressed in that press conference. I don't understand what that would accomplish, or if that would change anything really, for Frank or for this team, just to get rid of the guys, in the back row, essentially, that don't impact it as much.
It's a superficial move, in my opinion, if you do something like that. Like, what are you really accomplishing, right? If you went to any organization or any business and you left the top dog or the CEO or whatever, but you fired everybody that was immediately underneath him, but then kept the staff, what does that say about you as a leader? Yeah. Like that's the thing that I go, like, how does Frank Vogel, you're almost setting him up for failure again by doing that, because if they should fall on their face again, then everybody's going to know, oh, well, it's definitely Frank Vogel because they replaced his whole staff, right? And not the players to some degree. I just don't understand. I also don't buy, like, I get that he's only been here for a year and it's hard to establish yourself in a year. I totally understand that perspective. But you know what? I remember dating a girl back in the day for a year and I was like, this ain't going to work. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you just know. You
like
just
at
know.
That year mark, or did you know before and you just let it right out of you?
Let's not talk about.
We're not going to answer that.
Hey, let's not talk about old girlfriends. Because I made a comment the other day, and when I got home, it wasn't a nice. Yeah, it wasn't very nice when I walked through the door.
I missed that.
We warned you.
Yeah, we did warn you.
We tried.
But
You
like,
were here.
But like, no, I wasn't here. But like, again, like, I don't care. It's just like the Cardinals when they replaced, Johnny Fuckface with Kyler Murray. Like, he was only here for a year, and then they replaced him. Rosen, Josh Rosen.
Johnny Fuckface works.
They knew that he wasn't the answer, and I do think that there's absolutely better candidates out there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I do think that there's some legitimate candidates, and you don't necessarily have to find one that has championship pedigree. Budenholzer didn't have championship pedigree until he got one.
That's right.
Vogel, same thing. Like, okay, and they've only got one. It's not like they've been like a history of repetitive championships. It's only been one. It's a flash in the pan.
Yeah, Doc Rivers won.
Yeah, exactly. But he keeps getting gig after gig, right? Yeah. Because why? Because of 2008. They're like, there's got to be more to it than that. And there's other coaches.
I don't think it is for some of these organizations.
Well, there's other coaches, and specifically in other leagues, that have won multiple championships. So if you're really looking for somebody with a championship pedigree, they are out there.
Yeah. Hey, you guys all made a great point, but one I want to pound on is if Frank Vogel stays and he allows them to fire his entire staff that he picked, right? That's like a death sentence for a coach. You just don't do that. Right. You picked every person on this staff, and now you're saying it was them, not me, but I picked them. But it was them. That's the first problem I got, which makes this situation a little weird. Number two, I'm almost certain that they're not going to say, hey, you picked all those guys, we fired them, now pick 4 more guys. So he ain't going to have no control. Mm-hmm. They're going to come and say, we gave you that chance, you're staying, you're dropping, you're basically pointing at them. Now we're going to pick the 4. That never works. Like the coach, if that never works. So to me, this is a huge fuck up if this is the way that they go about it. If you're going to clean house at the back of that bench, you got to get the leader that put them together out as well.
Right. I mean, he already, and not that we never got an indication from Frank or Kevin Young that it was uncomfortable, but his lead assistant was already chosen for him, and it was the guy that was competing with him for the job that he got. There's already a naturally uncomfortable dynamic with something like that, where your lead guy is potentially your replacement if things go south. Yeah. If you do that with his entire coaching staff and fire the entire staff that he handpicked himself the last season, you're basically telling him, you're going to be the fall guy if this season doesn't get off to a good start. We already have your replacements lined up here to choose from on an interim basis. That's just no way to build a healthy environment, especially if you're banking on continuity and all that stuff. Like, it just doesn't work.
I think you and I have seen this firsthand before. It happened in season, but they fired most of Jeff Hornacek's staff on him and left Earl Watson and I think a handful of others, but primarily fired most of his main assistants. And what did that last? Another 3 weeks? Right. Like, you are setting up a guy for failure. And in that case, they knew who they wanted. He was sitting there the whole time, basically right behind the head coach. I just, that gets you nowhere. I think that actually exacerbates the problem. If you wind up keeping Frank Vogel, a guy that didn't seem to necessarily have control of the locker room at times, based on those reports we heard where they're laughing at him when he comes in and getting angry after that, after the Clippers, I believe it was, kicked their ass in that first half. And then you're cutting him out at the knees, but going, he's still your coach. Like, I think you're going to wind up with more problems than you had this year if you go that route. And that looks like an indecisive leadership group at that point too, above him. So at that point, now you're questioning everybody who's involved in that decision, including Jones, Bartelstein, Ishbia, and you go, oh, is Ishbia now like hedging his bet because of this new owner syndrome that everybody brings up? There's all sorts of things that become problematic if you just blow that staff up, but keep Vogel.